Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out in the threat of storm season starting up again. I checked my phone earlier, and there were quite a few storm cells around, but I think they were going to avoid Brisbane. So thanks very much for joining us this evening. I'm Malcolm Middleton. I'm the Queensland Government Architect, and I'd like to welcome you all here tonight for the second instalment of this special Asia-Pacific Design Library lecture series themed Designing for Happiness. And before I start, could I just remind you, and I checked myself, that you've switched off your mobile phones, and if you'd like to leave at any time, please use the back exit, and if you need to go to the bathroom, there are bathrooms on level 2 and 3. We will be video and audio recording this talk for the library website tonight. So if you have any questions in that regard, please speak to one of the library staff following Yen's talk. This talk tonight is the second in a three-part series taking place and as a lead-up into the 2011 Nielsen Design Lecture, this year featuring world-leading visionary, innovator, designer and author Bruce Mau. Now, Bruce Mau's work is informed by a vision that the power of design is boundless, and this capacity has a capacity to bring positive change on a global scale. So in the lead-up to this lecture, our three-part series is featuring three Australian design professionals whose work is also informed by the idea that good design can inspire social change and transform conventional thinking. And tonight we welcome Trinh as our second speaker. But a little bit of background first on the Asia-Pacific Design Library. There is a strengthened investment in the design collections here with a bespoke design lounge and a range of public programs. The Asia-Pacific Design Library is attempting to create a place to access both design resources and engage in design activity. And I can say personally, I've been backwards and forwards into this place a number of times over the last 3 weeks, including the TEDx weekend that some of you may have attended. There's a real energy, I think, about this place, and it's great to see. The Asia-Pacific Design Library is part of this wider network locally, nationally and globally for the banking of design knowledge and fueling creative processes. Collecting and participatory activities are tuned to the Queensland strengths and the Asia-Pacific context of where we live and respond to aspects of sustainability and explore the processes of design and innovation and inform, inspire and signpost further design sources and specialists. The State Library of Queensland, through the Asia-Pacific Design Library, is honoured to have Trinh with us tonight to speak on our series theme. Yen is a Brisbane urbanist and designer who's passionate about urban spaces, community building and collaborative design. And in that sense, I might say that my office has been collaborating with Yen recently as in a very important body of work that she's heading up, which is developing some important urban design frameworks for state government projects throughout Queensland. Yen has worked for design firms, non-profits and government in Australia, Toronto and New York. And I guess we find these days the great mobility that young professionals are able to enjoy and learn from. Yen is also the 2011 Queensland Premier's Emerging Design Leader Award recipient. So following tonight's talk, there will be an opportunity for audience questions during a facilitated discussion which we'll have at the end of the talk. And we will also be following the conversation on Twitter tonight, so if you'd like to join in online, the hashtag is #APDLHappy. I look forward to hearing from Yen and invite her now to talk to us. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Let me just find my presentation. Okay. It's quite blurry up here. I can't really quite see the crowd. Okay. I wanted to first explain that I'm an urban designer, and I wasn't quite sure if this audience was all designers or not. So I just want to quickly say, what is urban design? What do I and other urban designers do? I like to sort of describe it as the making of cities, and that's pretty broad, but that's okay. It includes architecture and landscape architecture, land use, transport, urban planning, but it really is to me about thinking about the whole thing as a bigger system, as well as public spaces, I think, is what really joins all of these parts together. So that's sort of urban design in a nutshell. So the happiness, designing for happiness is a theme, and so I was thinking about this project that I was looking at. It's more of an exhibition proposal, but I'd kind of also want to eventually write a book about this called The Happiness of Cities. I think that we're all sort of chasing our own happiness, and I became interested of, well, what's making people happy, and then how are cities and architecture and landscape design contributing to that? This was for the Canadian Centre for Architecture, and I'd stumbled upon this book that said there are 7 activities that will naturally lead to our happiness, and I think that there's definitely more than 7, but these are the ones that he was proposing. Reading, walking, looking, dancing, listening, swimming, and writing. And I thought these were all kind of really great activities that everyone could really relate to, that sort of crossed a lot of age and gender and culture and all these sort of things. And so I sort of started to look at looking at these activities and then what kind of elements in the city might these sort of inspire. So reading, for example, could be, you know, where do you read, like in parks? And so what about seating design? And we're in a library. And what about bookshops and cafes where you read? And then walking was a lot about really great streets and footpaths and plazas, you know, traffic lights, all these things that facilitate walking in our cities. Then looking was, I was interested in active streets and markets and galleries and all the fun things we look at in cities. Dancing was about nightclubs and bars, but also dancing out in the streets. Listening is about, again, similarly about music, private and or outdoor concerts. Swimming was an interesting one, which I think is really about, reminds me of pools, but also about, you know, we live in a city that has a river focus, so what about water and what does that play with in our cities? And then writing was the last one, which was interesting about, also about media and how people write and share stories as well. So out of that, I think that sort of happiness as individuals has this, and for me personally also, is this sort of expression of creativity. And so I found it interesting that these 7 activities could be done alone, or they could actually be publicly shared. You can enjoy a paper in your house, but you can also be sitting in a park or in a library reading. And you sort of see that downstairs as well. So this interesting mix of private activities, but also shared publicly. So I had this sort of theory that happiness in cities is really about public spaces, and I'm biased to public spaces anyway, but then also where communities can really start expressing their creativity. I'm going to go further to say that happiness in urban design is those 2 plus also how does that creativity begin to influence the design process and this bigger discussion of cities. And so that's the kind of projects that I'm going to be talking about which I think do those 3 things, and a lot of them are around public art and different types of design and community events. And I also think a lot that happiness in design is moving towards, like the theme of this whole series is about greater change. It stops becoming so much about a design object, and which is still valid, but there's a lot more talk about design process and about design systems and designing with communities. So just to sort of explain that a bit better, I think the more traditional views or stereotypical views of design is that a designer will have an idea, they'll put it into action, and they create this beautiful thing. Often it's, you know, it's a furniture design or a architecture, it's a building, it's a graphic design, it's a poster, whatever it might be. I suppose my view is that the power of the designer is a lot bigger than that. That the main power that we might have is actually how do we translate and take other people's ideas, create frameworks to make things happen, get community action around it to create bigger change. And it's, you know, it's interesting to be the sort of support act of Bruce Mell, who's eventually coming, but that's a lot of his book around massive change is about that. That's how you create sort of action. So this idea that the role of the designer might be a little bit different than it's been traditionally known. So, and you'll start to I'll try to explain that a bit in the projects. So, projects, the fun stuff, the prettier stuff. The first one I'm going to start off with is Parking Day, which started out in San Francisco in 2005 by an arts collective. And they were really interested in raising the awareness about a lack of green spaces in downtown San Francisco. So what they did was they put a park in a parking space. They put $2 in the meter, had it for 2 hours, put some grass down, a tree and a seat, and Parking Day started, and then it also spread across the world. So in the map there you'll see that it's in like 150 plus countries and cities now, including Brisbane. Yay! So it happened last month, and it's now an annual event that happens globally. It is a little bit more than just about green space. It's a whole lot of different issues around cities now, like it starts to pique interest around active transport and architecture and landscape architecture, all these other bigger things than just parks. So this is some of the examples from the 2008, which is the one that I was mostly involved with. This is the very first park that was created on La Trobe Terrace in Paddington in 2007. And this is kind of the evolution of what's happened in Brisbane, that it started out as one park in front of Urban Grind. I kind of got together with Morgan at that point to create some more. And we originally started off with the idea of 5 and accidentally created about 50. And then Amy and some other partners, and she's in the audience tonight, did an awesome job of really running with that and taking it further. And through those years, it's been our 5th year where we've been able to really create some great partnerships around universities and other people who really make it happen. Here's some more examples from that 2008 year. So it mostly happens in the CBD, Valley, Paddington, West End. They're the kind of communities that have really engaged with this a lot more. And I suppose in talking about this as a design project is that our role in it is really about the system of it. And that included the design of the blog and the website, creating the how-to guide for people. And this is also what San Francisco basically did as well. They created a how-to guide that anyone around the world could pick up. We created a more specific Brisbane how-to guide that anyone in Brisbane could pick up. And there's a lot of connections and facilitating some of that happening, but in the end, the design isn't owned by me or anyone organising it. It's actually really owned by the teams. I think that's a very different sort of way to be thinking about things. And so, again, there's this idea of the importance is in the designing of the frameworks to make it happen, and that's what catalyses the action to create the change. In this case, it was the actual individual parking spaces. So it's been going on for 5 years, and it's a lot of work, but it's, we're still passionate and love it. And what really excites me is there's sort of these two. It's an annual event, and it's really fun. And what's been really great is the ongoing sort of partnerships, this sort of amazing creativity you get out of people. We've gotten a lot of good media sort of involved with that. And one of the funnest things that I love is that a lot of other Australian cities are sort of coming towards us now, and everyone thinks that it's very legit and supported by Brisbane City Council, which it isn't really. But it's really great to start to see that we're catalysing other action around Australia. So I think Adelaide is probably the next biggest one that I know of. But I do tend to not like the term activism, and I'm more interested as an urban designer in the longer term change. And so what has that meant is that it's been really exciting to see that it's been incorporated into design education at QUT and UQ, and I think that's amazing that 300 students have to do this for an assessment piece. There's also been amazing flow-on projects in public space activation, including Amy, who runs the Games Night in King George Square, was a very direct outcome of a parking day space that was in Queen Street Mall, and now council is paying her to be doing this. There's also been permanent space with Dike Richards, which is an architecture office who's been really supportive in the Valley for the past 4 years, and they actually converted some of their spaces over to permanent non-car space. And I think what I'm really excited about is wanting to get this to lead to more action-based urban design process, which is what's happening in San Francisco, where now the city's taking it on. They've actually, because of all the success, they've created this pavement to parks which is a very similar idea. It's a little bit more permanent, and it's the city supporting and funding it. So why couldn't that happen in Brisbane? So then the parking day itself then becomes the tool almost. It's the way to test and prototype public space and activity to then get the change, which is real permanent concrete on the ground or green space on the ground. And this is also a format that's happening in New York. So New York's being, it's very well, recently, if anyone's seen it, like Times Square used to be trafficked and now it's all pedestrian space. But what they've done really uniquely is that they're all temporary. All these plazas you're seeing here are temporary. They're temporary for years, but they're temporary in the fact that they're just sort of paint and some seats and umbrellas that can all be moved, and they were really sold as test areas. They start to change the culture, and then turns out everyone loves public space, and so the community then starts to really fight for them. So in Times Square, it's been temporary for a couple of years. It's just been recently, I think this year, where a design firm's now won the competition and to actually build the thing. And that, in those few years, it means that they get political support to make it happen, as well as get the money to really be able to do these things. So when I was in New York, this is the next project, which was underneath the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway in New York. This is also linked a little bit to the parking day people over there, but basically it was 17 blocks of expressway that was all being used for car parking. Kind of imagine it's a bit like the Riverside Expressway if it had parking underneath. It was that kind of environment. There's a Navy Yards on one side, but a lot of housing around these spaces. And they've been looking to sort of revision about how they use it for something better. So I was involved in coordinating this event, which brought together a whole bunch of different non-profits. I actually originally got involved with it through Architecture for Humanity, but it was also the business group, Design Trust for Public Space, Transportation Alternatives, who were doing Parking Day over in New York. And it ended up being a community dinner for over 100 people underneath this expressway. So the design elements and systems were really around creating this event, and it ended up just being the only thing we really built was this table, which was meters and meters long. And it was this potluck dinner that everybody sort of literally brought things to the table. So the table itself is almost a framework and a tool that people can action around. The idea is that the idea of a community dinner could be a tool in itself to start engaging community discussion, and that's what it's been used for, that it could be an ongoing event to start rethinking how that space is used. So they did a similar thing a few years ago underneath that same space. This is a group in Berlin who do this. I think they sort of travel around the world with this thing called Space Busters. It's pretty cool. And so after I'd left, what they'd done was they continued to do that work with their partners over there, Architecture for Humanity, as well as Pratt, which was the university close by. And so these are some of their proposals for sort of public space changes underneath there. Okay, so the next project is one that I did with Pratt Institute. This was at sort of the end of my time in Toronto, and this was a bit of a summer project. With Sustainable South Bronx. I've also got a little bit of video to play, so that gives a better intro to it.
South Bronx. Sustainable South Bronx has basically been around since 2001, and our role as an organization is, we're very much based in the neighborhood, and we kind of provide a bridge in terms of advocating on behalf of the local community in terms of concerns or needs that they've expressed to us.
My name is Michael Cluer, and I'm a landscape architect with Matthews Nielsen Landscape Architects. And I'm the project manager for this particular portion of the Greenway, which is Lafayette Avenue. I also worked on the master plan, also done by Matthews Nielsen, which is for the whole Hunts Point neighborhood, which includes extensive bikeways, streetscapes, a whole new pedestrian circulation, as well as truck routes, and really just transforming this neighborhood into a much greener place.
A little over a year ago, when we were working on some of the community planning for the Greenway, and thinking about, actually moving the larger concepts forward to construction, the conversation about some of the street furniture kept coming up.
It became a partnership and collaboration between Matthews Nielsen, Sustainable South Bronx, another organization in the Point that's highly active in the area, which is called The Point, and Pratt Institute, the Pratt Design Incubator. Let me tell you a little bit about the actual design team that we've put together. 6 of the designers.
Okay, I'm going to need some support, tech support on this one. No? I kind of need some help on the tech support on this because it's sort of just moved. There's more of the video, but it just kind of changed back to the screen. It seemed to have disappeared. Let's just go back to the presentation. I can just talk about it and we'll try to play the other video for the next one. That's right. Where did I get to in the video? But basically it was street furniture, yes. So Sustainable South Bronx is a community group who are working in the South Bronx to do interesting stuff around street tree maintenance as well, and I guess over there it's a little bit different. Here, for example, the city council looks after your parks and your street trees and all that sort of stuff, whereas over there there's a bit more community ownership in it. So they had originally formed to create a park over there, and they also had a lot of job programs and so forth around green jobs. I don't know if anyone knows about the South Bronx, but I mean, if you know any stereotypes about it, which is really low income, drugs, prostitution, all of that is seriously true over there. So they're a community building kind of group. So it basically was so myself and a few other designers, architects, but also most of them were actually industrial designers from Pratt. So anyway, the end product we ended up, and there was all this consultation with the community, which the video was showing. But basically, in the end, the design product was this bit of street furniture, and it was just. So the idea was that they were looking to sort of. It's kind of based on this idea of a tree. And these were sort of like cells within this tree. That was kind of the original design intent. But it was about sort of celebrating the community and that. Because somebody had sort of passed away in the community and they were looking to sort of put a memorial plaque. And that's kind of where the idea had sort of spawned from. The idea that you could actually customise these seats in different ways. And so we were actually looking at sort of memorial tags as well as mosaics and this sort of stuff. But really, I guess the point is that I wanted to sort of say that it ended up becoming really about that system of how do you customise more than the shape or the form itself, really. It was really about how did we create a system that the community could add to, and that was what was more significant about the project, I thought. So the plan was that it could be part of all these sort of different community arts events, as well as they were looking to manufacture these seats themselves and create job program and all this sort of stuff around it as well. So I suppose that, again, the idea that what you're designing can sort of lead to a lot more. Okay, so the next project is priority seating for conversation, which is more of an art project that I did with the Museum of Brisbane. This is at RBH Women's Busway Hospital stop. It's a 3-year program that Queensland Arts is doing, so these are normally given over to advertising space, but it's been in rotation with artist works. It changes every 3 months. It's still going on right now. And so this was my piece, which was December to March, December 2010. And I was really interested in my urban design stuff around public transport and public spaces, and I think public transport is one of the areas that we could definitely do a lot more design thinking in. And so I was interested in not necessarily the panels itself, but the seat in front of the panels. So I created this idea that we have like priority seating for people with disabilities to kind of create this culture of courtesy. So what about a signage for people who want conversation to create a bit of a culture of friendliness? And the idea that friendly cities are safer, more people using public transport makes our cities safer and more vibrant, and all those sort of things. So, but it actually then it became a lot bigger than that, because it was more than just the panels itself. It became actually this sort of website and web template that anybody could download this sign and put it anywhere. And at that point I started to even talk with Brisbane City Council to put it on buses. But the idea is that anybody could do that themselves if they wanted to, and anywhere around the world. So some of this is me doing this in New York. And so again, it probably wasn't really the panels itself that became the end product. The web and the template and that framework I found sort of more interesting, because that's where you could inspire other action and actually greater change, and change that's sort of adaptable to any community and anywhere in the world. So they're kind of some of the projects I've been involved in, but there are also a lot of people doing this sort of stuff that I wanted to touch base on. So this is a group that I did the Underneath the Expressway project with, Do Tank Brooklyn. I love their name because I was sick of think tanks, so they were going to go do stuff. So these guys are really fun. So this is something that they do called chair bombing, and so it's made out of recycled shipping pallets, which is also what we use for the table. That's me building a chair. So I'm going to try this other video. So just open it from the... I think I opened it twice.
Oh my god. Come on.
Palette, saw, hammer.
Get it? That's for the party. Who is that?
I see. That's very cool.
Let me capture this guy.
So that's chair bombing. It's fun. they do all kinds of fun stuff like that. And again, basically what their real power is actually just the how-to guide. It was just a set of plans that you can actually buy online with them. And then they sometimes do workshops and that sort of stuff, but they're really just creating the tools for other people to do this. And again, it could happen here, it could happen in Brisbane. Another person that does really fun stuff in this is Chang, who is from New Orleans. So she kind of uses public art as almost tools, I see them as. So this is a sort of a stencil that she had, which it says this could be a nice place for a tree. And so she kind of went around her neighbourhood and spray painted the streets that way. So, and I'm questioning why couldn't, say, a city council who's about to do a street tree program do the same and give these sort of stencils out to community. She's also pretty well known for this sticker project, which some might have seen, which was about looking at, there were a lot of vacant storefronts in New Orleans, so the sticker was, "I wish this was a blank," and people would just fill that in. She's also got the next version of it, "I Want in My Neighbourhood," is an online project, sort of launching later in this year. So again, they're just tools that other people can pick up and use, and her as the powerful designer is just creating that tool. What people do with it is kind of up to them. So I think there's sort of, in all these kind of projects, there's lots of like key principles coming across to me about making it really simple for people, making it really fun, giving people these sort of tools, encouraging other people to take this personal action and adapt it, that they should be all very public projects, and that any traditional sense that designers really own anything should be given up. As well as I think, for me personally, it's about urban designers starting to recognise that we're probably more known to be designing the physical spaces, but what about activating them? And so some of those people involved in Do Tank had also started to put this together, and this is what they're terming it as tactical urbanism. So some of those examples I've sort of come across, but they're sort of saying that it's sort of the new way to do urban design, that it's a different kind of approach. I mean, planners will sometimes write proposals and visions for 20 years, whereas this is almost the other scale of that, where it's smaller scale, it's quicker, it's often cheaper, and it really relies on this idea that you can experiment as well. So it's phased, it's very localised solutions, it's a short-term kind of commitment. A lot of these are sort of easily seen as temporary things, there's lower risk, and it's developing a lot of social capital because there's so much community and organisation that needs to be involved in making these things happen. I'm kind of really becoming interested as well as how cultural institutions kind of play in this world as well. So this is the New Museum in New York, and often galleries aren't really working in this space, but here they created a whole festival around the discussion of cities, and so it was a conference as well as a street fair outside of their museum, as well as a whole series of activities. This is also the BMW Guggenheim Lab, which is also similar. It's actually took over, it's travelling around the world for the next couple of years, and it's taken over a vacant lot in New York to become this sort of area where all this programming and activity about cities can happen. And I just kind of recently found out they're now looking to change that vacant lot into a park, and using the Guggenheim Lab to create ideas around that, which I think is fantastic. So I suppose as part of the Queensland Design Awards, I'm really interested in seeing how other cities are doing that, including some research over in Europe is the plan with that award, and the dream of making a festival of urban design in Brisbane is really and it turns out there's going to be one. Well, we're going to start one. Next May is the idea. And this is just kind of recently started, the planets are aligning a little bit on this. But the idea is the URBNE festival, where we're going to be, I guess, looking to do a lot of the sort of projects that I've sort of just mentioned, where it's really about how we're using our spaces, creating ideas for Brisbane, design builds, exhibitions, all that stuff. And so again, I'm also just seeing the festival as a toolkit and a framework and a calendar of events that other people can get involved in. And so I suppose the message to leave the audience with, and mostly for the designers in the audience, is to kind of just see ourselves in the projects that we're doing, and that I think the power is really creating in the tools and how we're getting other people design with us, and that we are a lot more than just creating objects or things or products. It's really about how we enable others and teach others and advocate for things. And so designers for leaders as public change as well. So thank you. All right, I'm going to grab some water.
Great, well thanks Jen. There's a lot of really thoughtful stuff there. I'm going to ask Jen a few things that have just occurred to me as I've been listening, and we will open it up to the floor. Process is there will be some microphones, so if you would just wait until the microphone finds you, and you just indicate to me that you would like to ask a question, and I can pretty well see most of the auditorium from this angle, and I'll just try and get as many questions through as we can. So. So you just
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. It's very subversive. And even parking day is still technically semi-illegalish.
It would have to break all the, public liability, risk factors and.
Yeah, I think I'm very well aware of that, of how we think strategically about it. I would love to see it legitimised as such in planning process, and I think there's a space for that for sure, where we're engaging artists and community groups a lot more in how we're doing things in the day-to-day. I think that I just thought I lost my train of thought, but I was going to say that that's probably why it really links a lot to art. Rebarb itself is essentially they're not urban designers. It was an art group, and I think with art, if you tag anything as art, you kind of get away with it a lot more. And it's also, there's funding there for it as well. So I think if people think strategically about it, there's all these different interests that tie together, and it's just about sort of pushing the right triggers on it. But a lot of that stuff ends up being tagged as more art than planning or urban design, because you can kind of get away, it's more acceptable somehow in that space. But I think once that action starts to happen, as it did with San Francisco, well, then the other group starts to see how it can be legitimately used in theirs as well. The Department of Transport, this is the one who's doing it now in San Francisco, not an arts group. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. One of my favourite commentators is Elizabeth Farrelly, who writes she writes for the Sydney Morning Herald every week, and her piece this week is a great piece. I think I really enjoyed it. It talks to me, though, about arguing strongly for density equals happiness, city city settings are better, more engaging, healthier places to be than places that don't have the kind of amenity that comes with density. And the old density argument is always a traditionally vexed area, particularly with planning and urbanism generally. How would you relate that back to these kind of events and the idea of community happiness through design?
I think somebody sent me that article. I do often hear when I sort of present some of this stuff, and projects like Highline in New York, which was sort of amazing, where they sort of fundraised a lot of money, and I hear a lot of, oh well, it happens over there because of a certain density, and so I think I do agree that density comes with a certain amount of energy and money that other cities or lower density places don't have. Like with that Brooklyn Expressway project, there were 5 non-profits who were all sort of working in this urban space that got together, and I can't even, it was so easy to pull that together, and I don't know if it would have been that easy here, for example, because there is a certain amount of density and action that's existing there. So, and I guess the other point is that I do actually agree that where density equals happiness in terms of we need social interaction. I think there's a lot to be said about that. That involvement in our communities is important for our own individual happiness.
Great. Now, I know there was first question here. Yeah. Yep.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah.
Yep, that's on.
It's Karen. Thank you for your presentation. It was great. I liked you presenting low-cost ideas and putting them into action. Our local park recently was improved, and they seemed to spend a fortune and not improve it, and pretended to do consultation. And, you know, the day after the consultation ended, they started the works. And as a community member, it's incredibly frustrating that the community gets treated sort of like that. And so just wanted to say, good on you. It's good stuff.
Well, I guess in just a response to that, what I wanted to also, what I went over to New York originally for was really inspired about how they look after their parks. And over there it is really much more owned by community groups. So, for example, like Bryant Park. So they run, I guess, a bit more like the South Bank model here, where there's a dedicated team and budget and fundraising for that specific park. So it might be, for example, if it happened in Brisbane, then New Farm Park would get its own little cooperative, and your park would get its own. And so the ownership of parks is a little bit different over there. And there's definitely examples, and people sort of exploring that in Brisbane. So hopefully we'll get a little bit more ownership out of them.
It's an interesting observation that the bureaucratic structures that we have, we seem to argue, and certainly since I've been in Brisbane, that the big central city council is more efficient and gets more done and can do more with the dollars. But all the examples that Yen's shown seem to be the opposite, in the sense that you have no idea how big the council is because they're not really involved. It's really about other groups of people taking initiatives and working to the scale that they're happy to work with. So perhaps that is an initiative in itself that government agencies and councils here could try and engage with in a different way.
Yeah. A lot of the feedback I also was interesting when I present stuff overseas is that people ask why those groups don't happen. Like, why isn't there a group in your park right now? It's also this the groups might not exist already, and the government isn't supporting the creation of those groups. Because, for example, I was doing an internship with Department of Parks over there, where they have this whole area called Partnership for Parks, where it's about helping community form those groups. But also in Australia, there tends to still be this little bit, I pay my taxes, therefore the council should be doing everything. There's a bit of that, which is slightly different over there. A lot of these great park initiatives, like around Bryant Park, back in the 90s, 80s or whatever, is because the city pulled all the funding and they had no money, so the community around that got together. So it's a bit of both. It kind of comes from both directions.
We have a question up the back.
Yes, I was just had a career question, if I may. Yeah, and just interested in your background into get into urban design and what you would recommend to other people wanting to get into that field. At the moment, I understand you morph into it a lot of the time through architecture or landscape architecture, urban planning as a background, and say perhaps get a master's degree or work experience in that field. Just wondered your tips on that, around that, if you recommend more experience or educational there, and what you said.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I have this conversation with people a lot about whether urban design is a profession or a discipline kind of idea. Like, so my background is I come from a urban planning out of QUT, and most of my... So I kind of called myself a planner a lot, and then started working with a landscape architecture urban design firm, that's when I began to sort of feel a bit like I could call myself an urban designer. I think that it's kind of tough because there's not many urban design courses, I suppose. So I think that urban design covers so much that people from, I think, a landscape architecture background is probably the real strong people in urban design. That's just my personal view. So I think definitely getting experience is when I sort of started to feel like I could call myself one. I think that's probably the best. Get as much variety and experience is probably the best. But where you can find courses, it's just that it's a bit harder because there's not that many out there. I only know of QT, really, or in Brisbane, that is.
So the planning, your background is urban planning. What differentiates that from a planning course?
Often it's it's a tough one. I don't know what the Masters of Urban Design is, but often urban design is understood as a scale thing. So planning, to me, I could be working on something like a regional plan or a whole council kind of area, whereas urban design is typically known as the sort of the neighbourhood block kind of precinct, smaller scale of stuff, where you are probably working a lot more with landscape architects and architects, maybe. That's how I've sort of generally known it as. Whereas planning can often be bigger, much bigger than that, bigger systems, and also a longer term thing. Urban design often is creating a site of some sort, whereas planning might be a 20-year strategy or something like that. So it's time scale, that kind of stuff.
So we have more questions? Yes, one over here. Just here.
It's a tough one, though. They're all kind of related.
There's no simple answer for that. We could have a whole symposium on that question.
I'm a computer scientist and I design interactive technologies. So I was really interested in your design framework of building tools to let people design their own artifacts. And I loved a lot of examples. But my question is, how do you get people involved? From my experience, it's very hard to actually get people excited and interested in what you're doing. So my question is, how do you get people engaged, interested in, how do you sparkle interest in wearing tags, what they want to change about their neighborhood, or how do you get people on the street and occupy a parking space? Can you share some tips on that?
I suppose with the parking day sort of stuff was kind of just sort of knowing some of the bigger issues that we could sort of pitch it to. So like parking day, yes, originally started about parks, so we could pitch it to community groups and community gardens and sort of the green sort of agenda. Then we could also look at, it also relates to transport, so let's have a look at transport groups and bike groups and all that sort of stuff. So kind of understanding the bigger audience and where you could sort of link things to. Also, like we were saying, how it's a bit easier with art, so you could sort of link it to Arts Way and all that sort of stuff. So that was kind of just strategically thinking about things, about all the possible different connections you could make was kind of one way. But the online stuff is really interesting because it's even with the parking day, you've noticed that you can get a whole bunch of people really interested in the idea, but then there might be only like a group of 20 who actually commit enough to go build the space. So a lot of these ideas become very viral on the online kind of ways, but then how do you get that into physical action is definitely a lot trickier. I think the idea, well, I mean, with a lot of Candy Chang's work, I think it's because it, and even the Brooklyn guys, it's because they make it resonate on that very local level. And so there's an attachment to your own community, therefore you're more passionate and interested about changing it, then you're more willing to like sticker it, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's making it really local and relevant to that person is probably how you engage. It's kind of like with anything, how we message things, it's what's in it for them, right? So you've got to really figure out who you're trying to reach and what that opportunity for them is probably what we were trying to do with some of this stuff.
Do you think the social media and the general immediacy of the kind of technological age in which we live assists these kind of projects or enables them in ways that otherwise they would not be enabled?
Yeah, definitely. It means that things can happen quicker. It seems ideas spread quicker and in different ways. So, for example, this festival was sort of looking to do, it's based a lot on this model that New York have done, and I went to go talk to them. And what they did was they created this really great map, this online map where people can pretty much put all their different ideas, and then designers would take that idea and so, you could say, I want to market here. We could then say test it out and just build that market there for the festival. And anyway, New York had sort of created an ideas book out of it. And so I was talking to the guy who originally sort of designed that, and he was talking about how, I kind of went over the top of my head, but about coding and all this sort of stuff. But basically, there's a tool that we can take and adapt, and that just wouldn't happen otherwise. And it's also a bit of its own social media, but it means that tools can move anywhere. Yeah.
The intervention part of it I find very interesting, the nature of being able to set something up and test it on the basis that it is temporary, as you said, sometimes for years, but the notion of actually being able to show and demonstrate a reversible intervention circumvents a lot of bureaucracy potentially. Yeah,
I think it is also, I think people are just a bit funny about change, just generally. And so, it's a little less scary, and I think that's a really great thing about the New York stuff, is that it created a cultural change in how they value pedestrian spaces, that it was not for cars. And it was okay, like if you try to close a road here, I reckon people would freak out about it, say, oh, it's going to totally wreck traffic and stuff. But then you see events like, there were a couple of years ago, there was that time when there was a crack in the expressway and they had to close it. And oh my God, people freaked out. So it was traffic for one day. And then after that, people adapt. And I think it really shows, all those interventions shows.
There was another question here. Oh.
I was just going to finish that to say that it starts to show, those interventions show that people can adapt to things.
Yeah, it's powerful.
I just wanted to ask, in relation to Brisbane, seeing as we've got such a small population living actually in the CBD, do you think that the wider Brisbane community is really invested in, or feel that they actually belong to the city of Brisbane? I know we call ourselves a city, but we're almost a huge conglomeration of suburbs, and I wonder how invested we are actually in city urban interventions, or do you find, if we live or work in different places, how that kind of relates?
Yeah, well, I guess I live in the valley, so I'm probably a bit biased and I feel very urban. But I totally agree, and that's a lot of but the thing is, I guess, is that a lot of those ideas are adaptable. The idea that, Parking Day ended up being very inner city because they were the kind of communities around that. But we did also talk about, bringing it out to the suburbs, and you kind of see, a lot of those ideas. You can have a street fair in West End, or you could have it in my parents, where they live in, Middle Park, which is the outer suburbs. So I think a lot of those ideas are probably adaptable in terms of community building, and all those sort of principles shouldn't just be city. But I do kind of wonder if some of that Brisbane culture is because, it kind of goes back to people need opportunities to sort of also feel connected to their city as well. And if there aren't those provided, then maybe we've lost that a little bit as well. So I'm not sure.
My question's sort of related to that as well, but I was wondering, for the social media aspects, it's sort of related to both. There was the social media, and so, you know, you might have used that to get people along to it, but did the general media, because all of this sort of messaging and the way things are portrayed is just so important these days for people's perceptions. So did the general media at all pick up on it? And from that, or other people around who weren't involved in the events, how did they feel about it? And did the different events, and did it change in New York to the reaction here? And of that, was there a sort of particular, a lot of the people who were in the videos and things were younger people. So does it appeal more to a particular demographic, or was it accepted across the range? Do you know what I mean? Was it publicly acceptable, or was it seen as a sort of a subversive act?
Yeah.
A lot of questions.
You're right, it probably is a younger people thing. And that might be a reflection of who is on social media, and also a reflection of who is organising this stuff. I mean, so I'm 30, and so most of my friends are around that age, and so they're the people that I'll automatically go to. And I probably don't know a whole lot of older or younger people. So well, I suppose on different projects it's quite different. The Brooklyn one, because there was the community that lived quite close nearby, there was a pretty good age mix. I'm thinking generally of Parking Day, it's been very generally positive, but very mixed kind of reaction. People involved are kind of also businesses as well as students, and so there's quite a range in all of that. And for example, you just sort of mentioned that thing about messaging and stuff. So one example is the busway project that I did. I got a lot of mainstream media out of that, of ABC Radio and those sort of things. But it was more interesting to find that I came from this very urban design kind of thing about public transport and all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't necessarily what they were interested in talking to me about. They were more interested about, the conversations that people have at bus stops, and, the cute guy picking up the girl at the bus stop, all this sort of stuff. And so it ended up being a whole lot more about something else, and just the idea of talking more and all that, rather than some of the more public transport messaging that I kind of wanted in there. So which isn't such a bad thing, at least people were sort of talking about the project. It's kind of like the Parking Day thing, I think. If people want to be negative about it, or sort of take it as a anti-car thing, or whatever it is, I think that all discussion's good. So, but you're right, the messaging is definitely hit and miss sometimes.
Okay, we have one more in the middle and then one at the front.
Hi. There's a lot of aggressive greenfield development happening, kind of, I guess, Gold Coast, Brisbane, outer suburbs and Sunshine Coast at the moment. And I guess with that comes a lot of artificial cookie-cutter type feeling places. I'm just wondering what opportunities you see in, I guess, injecting that kind of richness that all of your projects portray.
I think that it's funny, because I think that I had this thought once that a lot of suburbs cop a lot of flack because they are cookie cutter, and I totally agree that they all look like that. I think most places aren't given enough time to sort of grow, because that stuff takes time for a community to move in and start adapting their homes to make it look less cookie cutter, put their own yards in and sort of stuff. So just as a planning thing, I think that places really need time to develop, and what we're sort of seeing is that we're seeing them brand new, so it is definitely hard to get that sense of place and interest right away. Though, having said that, there's a lot of different things that you can do with sort of architecture and built form and stuff. And so just something that comes to mind is the urban land development Authority, who are the state government development arm, I suppose. They're doing some really great things, I hear, in Fitzgibbon, where they've basically got social, like a community centre doing these sort of things and making sort of social interaction a real important thing. So you're right that it isn't probably happening so much, but there are also attempts to where you're putting sort of more community programming in, but it also just takes time, I think. Yeah, I mean, traditionally the developers don't have any interest in it. They build something and they leave, right? After it's sold, it's not theirs. Maybe with ULGA, where they're trying to demonstrate something, they've got more of a agenda to be putting that in. But yeah, you're right. It probably is. It then ends up being. It tends to. It's kind of like parks. It's kind of like it ends up falling to the councils to be doing that a lot more. Than the developers itself, and sure they probably contribute some money and some of the builds and all that involved, but most of that ongoing responsibility ends up not being the developer, so it's mostly councils.
Hi Anna, how are you going? Oh, sorry, Yen. I really enjoyed the different projects you worked on in your presentation, and I was interested to hear a bit more about the idea side of things. So, were they your ideas that you're following through, and how do you know which ideas to pursue, and do you have many failure stories or any ideas that didn't take off the ground?
Well, I mean, I don't actually feel like I design much. I think I'm happy to borrow ideas out of other people. Like Parking Day was not my idea at all. You know, it's from San Francisco, and I blogged about it, and I thought it was cool. You know, so I don't even know if any of those were my ideas even, but. I don't know what, I think I just choose projects that I think are fun, and my own sort of interest is about anything that's really pushing the discussion about urban cities and all that sort of stuff, so that's probably how I choose things, or they choose me, sometimes by accident. Failures, that's an interesting one. Well, actually, I mean, I think, for example, I was over in Toronto where we created a lot of great systems with two non-profits. It was more of an academic project. It was with around urban greening and affordable housing, and we created this really great, all these great systems and design projects for renovating neighbourhoods. But because we didn't really quite have the buy-in by the client, that they ended up just becoming great ideas that they didn't have the capacity to really put into action. So I think that's generally the failure of most projects, is that you don't have those partners lined up at the beginning to do things. And that's the difference between some of this short-term stuff, is that you can get commitment from partners and it doesn't take a lot of money and it sort of happens really quickly. So I would say the failure of projects, and definitely personal ones, is because they're great ideas but they don't have this, they're not sustained by a group because it hadn't been agreed on at the beginning, or for whatever reason people don't have the capacity to keep it moving forward.
Thank you.
Are there any... We're getting to the end of time. Is there another question that I can't see? There's one, yep, in the centre.
Hi. I just wanted to ask if when you moved abroad, did you do that to pursue this kind of projects? Like when you finished your degree at university, did you feel that in Brisbane you couldn't sort of experiment this type of projects or things that you had interest in? That's, was that the reason for you going overseas? And another question is, like, where did all the funding come from for all the projects that you had shown us? Like, did most people that work on it do it voluntarily, or was there some, organisations like finding all the time for the people that came up with the ideas and actually making things happen?
Okay. The first bit was about overseas. Originally, it was to go study overseas in Toronto, and it was a program the Institute Without Boundaries, which was started by Bruce Mao, who's coming over for the design lecture. And so, yes, that was something that I felt at the time that I couldn't get in Brisbane. And I don't think I was, like the New York stuff, I wasn't particularly chasing those types of projects over there. Feels like it kind of happened a bit by accident. But it's been interesting, though, coming back from that, is that I think it's great. I think everyone should go live and work and study or something overseas at some point. It really broadens how you just are and adapt and all kinds of stuff. But what I've definitely loved coming back last year was that you can just do so much more in Brisbane. There's something about smaller cities where you can do stuff. So I had this dinner discussion the other day. You can go learn off amazing people, or you can learn by just doing it yourself. And so that's what I really enjoy about Brisbane, of being able to, put these things into action. Like, we wanted to start this festival, is going to, teach us a whole lot. Or we could say go to Melbourne and learn off some people who are already doing festivals. So it's a very different kind of thing. What was the other question? It was funding. No, most of this is just free, passionate people doing it. I think I just stay up late nights doing parking day and started it on a free blogspot website. And I think and free emails and every free kind of weird online app thing I could find to piece together. The Brooklyn Expressway stuff was all donated materials. A lot of the parking day stuff is people borrowing, finding their own sponsorship. Most of it is a little, unfortunately, unfunded. Some of the other projects with non-profits, they're funding their own time. But most of it is just people interested in this stuff. I'd love to know how to get paid for this fun stuff, though. I haven't figured it out. So, no, this is a lot of my side work.
Thank you.
Well, I think we've just about, that's been a really good conversation. Thank you all for participating. I have one last question for you, Yen. This State Library building here in the complex, to me, has sort of become a happy location. It was a pretty serious place, and then a lot of things changed here, and the nature of this part of the South Bank in Brisbane, of course, has now been very much focused on the cultural life of Brisbane for, it's coming up now 40 years. But the interventions here recently seem to have quite fundamentally changed, particularly this building and the way it's used. My question is, do you think it is the change to the building, or is it the setting that's grown and matured? Is it the technology that we now embrace, or is it an indefinable other, or all of these things that have come together in a way to create what seems to be a really energetic spot now?
Yeah, it's one of my favourite buildings in Brisbane, actually. I kind of love this area. I definitely do agree it has a lot to do with physical design and the urban design and architecture of this space. But I suppose what I think is, coming back to some of the talk, and is that actually I think it's the organisation that's the biggest change. The fact that the library sees itself as more than just a library is huge. And so I think it's that, and the dedication to publicly program and stuff. I think that's what really creates cultural change rather than the space itself. I mean, and that's kind of like the parking stuff. It could be the most ugly space, but it's actually the people and the programming that will totally change it. So it's a bit of both. I think it's more about the people, but I'm biased that way. But it's a beautiful building as well.
Okay, well, I think Brisbane's pretty lucky that Yen's gone and done all the things that she's done and come back to Brisbane. Join with me, please, in thanking her this evening. Just to give you a little bit more information about the next and the last of these talks before Bruce Mao, the next talk's in 2 weeks on November the 9th. And it will be given by Jason Grant of the Graphic Design and Visual Communication Practice in Cahoots. And it's well worth looking up their website. There's some beautiful work on that, some really interesting work. So for more information and tickets, I guess you know how you got here tonight, so I guess you know how you could get here again. Anybody wishing to attend the Nielsen Design Lecture this year, you do need to register a place because it's a ticket lottery. It's only so many seats, and that's a really sell-out event. So if you go to the State Library website, you can register for a lottery option. The Design Lounge will remain open here until 8 o'clock tonight, and you're welcome to join us in the lounge to continue the discussion and view the Design for Happiness display, which includes Yen's top 5 books. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time.
Talking, sharing every